All right, my friends, welcome once again to another episode of the Red Delta Project podcast, helping the whole world get stronger with the power of calisthenics training. Today is a very special episode. We are addressing it's sure to happen every once in a while in everybody's training career of burnout, getting really tired and just feeling like I'm going through the motions, I'm doing everything, putting in the work and stuff, but I'm starting to feel like I'm losing a little motivation and steam with this. And to help me carry this weight, I've asked my friend Hampton from Hybrid Calisthenics to come on because his whole perspectives about calisthenics and fitness and happiness and living a good quality of life, which is really what this is all about, are just such a refreshing breath of fresh air. If you haven't seen any of his videos or anything that he's produced before, highly recommend you check him out. The links, of course, down below as always. But I wanted to get his take on things because I'm sure it's going to be above and beyond what I would bring about. So without further ado, Hampton, welcome for the Red Delta Project podcast.
Hey, Matt. Thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you. Good to see you as well. I've been wanting to connect for so long. You've been doing this for quite a while. How long have you been in the calisthenics game here for?
Actually, not necessarily really that long. I would say I have been into fitness most of my life, right? Like a lot of my family and friends, they were into martial arts things. So that was very much a big part of my upbringing so much. And as you can probably surmise, it's not necessarily like bodybuilding gym type of fitness, but like martial arts. For a while, it was kind of for some people, it was a prevalent idea that weights would slow you down. So there was naturally a lot of, not to say there's really any not to say I really would espouse that, but there's a lot of body weight type of high rep, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, squats, things like that. So I was always into that kind of training. So it's something I was always kind of drawn into, especially just kind of something people noted early on was flexibility and mobility for me, where I can naturally get into some positions and stuff. So I was encouraged early on to pursue that. I didn't really start it until I was 22, which, my gosh, was like 8 years ago now. And that's been off and on since then. That's really when I started researching it, because at the time I was just doing 500 push-ups a day, broken over 6 sets. And I always knew in the back of my mind, I was like, I probably should have, some kind of balanced routine or something, but I'll put it off for a little bit. Right. But eventually when I started researching, I was like, oh, there's different progressions of this. Oh, there's different ways to do it. And really where my passion took a hold really wasn't necessarily for myself. Or just for myself, because the progressions were cool and built it. But I always felt like there's maybe diminishing returns in terms of benefit to your quality of life. We kind of have something in our minds where it's like, oh, I might get pinned under a huge log someday, and it's perfectly in the bench press position, and I'll push it off, or I'll save, I'll deadlift a log off a baby or something, right? A mother and child. These. I'm not saying they won't happen, but for daily quality of life, you're going to see a huge amount of improvement if you get to the point where you weren't able to stand up without help, and now you can, right? And now you can push yourself off the ground. So a lot of the basics that people consider too easy, especially if they're fit and they're young, they weren't necessarily always accessible. And I think because we focused on building ourselves, which is fine, but I was looking at the progressions, and I was like, oh, this can apply to my mother. This can apply to my friends. She can do the wall push-ups. She can do these knee raises and things. And the idea of bringing them and having that much more extra value from bringing them, not from 0 to 1, but basically that 0 to 1 range, rather than pushing and splitting hairs and I can bench 315 to 405 and that range, because there's really I wasn't getting my mom into the gym, but I can get her on a wall. Right. So that's really where I started pursuing. I'm like, interesting. So not only progressing for myself, realizing that I can progress beyond what we consider push-ups and pull-ups, but also using that to help my friends and family gain and reap that initial on-ramp to fitness, where they can gain the most from the functionality standpoint and improve their quality of life.
Oh, I love that. And that's always something that's really kind of attracted me to the world of calisthenics is, when I started getting into fitness and I was coaching people as a trainer and stuff, and I was all about the gym culture and, is it the gym? And you've got 15 different bench press exercises and stuff. And I was loving it. But friends and family and other individuals who were asking me for advice, I realized very quickly, it's yeah, I like that sort of thing, but most people don't, or most people aren't going to be able to do the types of lifestyle habits that I have. So I was always looking for, well, what sort of things may be accessible to most everybody? And well, we all have a body. We all are working with gravity to some degree. And that was always something that was appealing to calisthenics, is that we can make it fit so many more people, which is why I think it can be so widely adopted. However, one of the things that I think runs into a bit of a snafu with calisthenics is because it's so a low barrier to entry, I think a lot of people also get tripped up by a lot of common, I wouldn't say mistakes, but errors in their methodologies. It's kind of like when I got into running. I was like, I'm just going to run. And I just ran. And then my knees started hurting and everything because I didn't really know what I was doing. But it was so easy to get started because you just go out and run. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you find that people kind of run into when it comes to just starting into the calisthenics training regimens?
So that's an interesting question. So there's a lot of the usual things where I could say they should start early, like with an easier progression than they probably want to, and they can take their time, get adequate rest, and all of this. But really, it's interesting because when you are not really into fitness and you somehow get inspired, you get a call to action, and you want to start either lifting or doing calisthenics, that is a new journey. You're now effectively learning a new skill. And we don't always recognize this, but I've started to realize that something like fitness is actually two separate endeavors. So in order to get fit, you have to do the fitness stuff. So you have to eat, you have to exercise, you have to sleep, all that. But something that we often take for granted is we also have to learn that. Right. So we actually have to learn what to do. So that can either happen through you hiring a trainer if you're in a situation to do that and you want to do that, or a lot of people really have to learn themselves. And the issue with learning yourself, which, I learned myself, you may have been like at least partially self-taught. We read books. I think a lot of people like to practice and learn themselves. Something with that is we also have to gradually shed preconceived notions and things that we think we know. Right, because how do we actually have? Because we ask ourselves, why do I have this notion of this is how to train? And then you actually dig and you're like, oh my god, there's not really a foundation to it. Or I saw the character Rocky the boxer train this way, or I saw Naruto train this way, right? And look, I watch anime. I like when we watch Demon Slayer. And the main cast was like doing this training arc, and they were like doing push-ups. I felt inspired by that. That was cool, but it wasn't necessarily like optimal programming, right? I was just inspired to do it, and I think things like that, we have to recognize the things that we may think we know, but we don't, and that is maybe high repetition isn't always the best thing for our current goals. Maybe doing like there's people err on kind of both sides of what I consider would be very much in quotes optimal. So some people do less than what's necessary. So something that I like to push is, or I like to recommend for a lot of people starting out, is I recommend fewer sets than people are used to, especially for a hybrid routine, right? So I say 3 sets to near failure. And I see someone like do the exercise, like, this is too easy. And I see them do it, and their face doesn't change the whole time, nor do they slow down. I'm like, well, you weren't anywhere near failure. Right. And look, if you don't want to train near failure, that's a whole separate thing. But I was like, the reason you find it too easy is because you're not pushing hard enough during sets. And then some people push too hard. Someone said they wanted to go until they couldn't move. I said, well, that's actually pretty hard to do. Like not be able to move for a while, nor is it good for you. Right. That's something that I had to drill into a lot of the young men. Right. So there's kind of like this macho feel. Right. Look, I've been there. Right. To where it's like, no, I'm going to work harder than everyone. I'm going to do 5,000 push-ups a day. I'm like, hey, let me know how that goes. Right. I don't even argue with them. Right. And but then they come back and it's, I'm in tremendous pain. And I was like, well, yeah. That's and then something I had to tell them is that's not necessarily good for you. Like, it's harder, but harder isn't necessarily better for you, nor are you making more progress. And I'm like, that's a very important disconnect. It's like harder is not always better. Easier is not always better. You have to find something that works for you. Right. And there's that. And there's also someone told me that they thought it was too dangerous to push to near failure, which it can be, but like absolutely, work your way through it, build up to that, especially if you're just starting out and you've been sedentary. But I think after you're used to movement, occasionally pushing yourself, I would say a lot of people push at least near failure. Like total failure is a different thing, but near failure to where you can't do any more like clean reps, very common thing. After you're built to it, it's not dangerous inherently, I would say. So the different misconceptions like that, and misconceptions, even like your recovery. Some people think that you have to be sore in order to make progress, which is not true, by the way, right? Now, it might be correlated if you didn't kind of advocate for the other side, but it's not necessarily an indicator of growth or strength. Someone told me they wanted to change their leg workout because they weren't waking up in tremendous pain anymore. I was like, well, that's actually a good thing, right? His thing was like, how do I get more pain in my life? I'm just like go through a bad breakup. So that, and there's so it's all the preconceived notions, shedding the preconceived notions. And this is actually something that we have to do in almost any endeavor that we try, right? Whether it's art, music, we have to shed things that we think we know and learn in order to make room for those new things. The thing is, not everyone needs to be an artist or musician, but just about everyone needs some degree of fitness in their life if they want to optimize their life. And like, you need, like, before, even if you don't actively work out, you still work or you still move, and that's a required part of your health, I would say. So because of that, some people may not be used to approaching it as an endeavor and approaching it with the hard work and approaching with that kind of work ethic, even though it very much is, I would say, a requirement for healthy living, is to have some type of activity, structured or not, in your life.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny how you're mentioning these sorts of ideas. I'm getting that scene from Star Wars in my head where Yoda is telling him, you must unlearn what you have learned. And I'm thinking back on so many instances in my life where I made a big jump forward and made a lot of progress or improved in something. And it always came from shedding some sort of old ideas or notions about how things were done. And it's like, I get rid of that old rule or way of doing things. Now there's room for something better to come in. And I found that it's a lot easier to shed old ideas that came from an external source. Like, oh, I read it in a book, or a teacher told me this. But the rules that are the real hard ones to fight are the ones we kind of make up or implant for ourselves. Like you were mentioning, I got to do 500 push-ups a day. Or if you tell yourself, well, it makes sense to just never eat sweet foods ever again. When it's an idea that you kind of come up for yourself, then that's even harder to break out of, because in order to shed that idea, you kind of have to confront it and say, like, oh, I was mistaken. You can't say the coach was mistaken, but I was mistaken. That can be even harder to get and overcome as well.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. So a lot of times I think going with the topic of today of burnout and getting really kind of fatigued and tired physically, mentally, emotionally about training and stuff, I think a lot of that comes from some of these ideas that we kind of inhabit for ourselves. Is we've got these rules or these dogmatic approaches that we have, and they just keep overdriving us to overinvest. We're putting in too much time and energy and effort. Again, you were saying, like, more work doesn't necessarily mean more productivity. But it's something that we kind of have to look at, because sometimes when we don't know what we're doing, I think there's this tendency to over rely on hard work and double down on putting in more effort.
Yeah, 100%. I think people who work hard, first of all, my understanding of what constitutes hard work, especially out of fitness, especially because fitness, there's only so much you can do before you really have to rest. And like, I think even people who are very gung-ho understand, like, a few hours in, you're starting to like get diminishing returns of like how much you're actually going to gain from the extra exercises you do. But my understanding of hard work really has expanded, because what I used to think was hard work is no longer really that hard, right? And like, I don't mean that as like, oh, I work harder than you, but I think everyone kind of goes through this. When we were 7 or 8 and we were learning math, like, man, this is hard, and now this, like, when you're at 25, you're like, man, I wish I did that for a living instead of like, logistics and graphs and things. So like, our understanding of hard work usually grows as we become more able. And especially in things like business or writing, things like that, I used to think, oh man, I spent all day on this. I'm like, that's cute, right? Like, this is me saying it to my past self, not to you all, right? If you feel like you work hard, if you're working hard, high five, great to you. But like, my personal understanding of hard work really has changed, and really now it's like, well, how many days of work? It's like, well, 100. I was like, now we're getting started towards building something good. Let's keep building towards it, right? And it not only does it have to be hard, probably harder than we think, but it also has to be in the right direction, right? And I think when there are so many metaphors that we can use for this that I'm not even sure where to go with, but it's just like if you're going to put all your effort into something, you're going to go hard, it better be in the right direction, right? If you want to go north and you're actually going northeast, right? Like, you can go faster, but the person going like half your speed might be making it faster because they have a more optimal direction. That's really where it comes from, finding a map, or in this case, it would be what we were talking about, having someone who knows what they're talking about, or, if you want to learn, then really dialing in and optimizing your approach and learning. That can be a real cheat code, so to speak, for your fitness, is knowing where you want to go with the understanding and the underlying sentiment that might change over time. Right. A lot of people, like, so the traditional thing is like, I want to get bigger and stronger. I want to get all the girls. So it's very much from like a young male perspective. Right. Later on, it's like, I just want my knees not to hurt. Right. So so that there's there's different goals and they change over time, and that's okay. And I think that just to kind of facilitate the discussion, the overarching discussion we might have today, can help you reduce burnout, is to realize that as your direction changes and as you learn, and you learn some of the things that you shed some of your preconceived notions, some of your goals will change. And you have to identify through constant repetition and practice whether that sometimes is a distraction and you actually should keep pushing, or you should actually pivot. And that's actually can be hard to know, right? Because some people think it's always one or it's always the other. Like, you always push. Well, it's not always the case. Sometimes, you get inside and you realize, oh, this is actually like, this is the wrong thing that I need to do. Like, I went into college, I went into the wrong major, right? I need to actually do this major instead because I don't like math. I want to do biology instead. Turns out biology also has some math. And then, or you think that I should stay the course, right? And it's like, I'm going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but that's not always the case either. So that can help circumvent burnout, is when you try to develop your personal self-awareness about what you actually want and where you should push. Because even in exercise, right, when we're pushing to failure or near failure, our body does tell us to stop, right? Because like, we have those mechanisms inside us to be like, you don't need to be pushing this hard, because it's usually not optimal, for people who just want to coast through life, right? Which is what we're kind of designed for. The homeostasis, we're supposed to just like adapt to what we need, and we don't really need to be more muscular and strong to go through our life. We're telling our body that we need that, and then we adapt to that. So that's why we get those signals to stop. But because we're very intentional about where we want to go, like, no, I want to grow this bicep, then we keep pushing. I want to be stronger, then we keep pushing. However, when you're starting to get some signals to where it's like, man, I have some pain here, it's like, oh, I'm not getting the results I want, and maybe I actually started working out because I want external validation, which I believe has been shown and is largely believed to be not as sustainable as internal motivation. You can use different words for that, but like wanting external validation isn't as strong as having an internal desire just to get strong, healthy, fit, and strong, maybe to help others. These internal motivators are usually much more lasting and powerful. So it's a big thing. It's like, what is your personal reason? If it's actually, because you were upset that this girl rejected you in 7th grade, or this guy rejected you in 7th grade, and now you want to get back at them, I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong. A lot of us go through similar stories, but it's important to recognize and have honesty and self-awareness and the humility to recognize that you were wrong, to where we can start to turn these things and recognize them and reconcile them and turn them into something that's more confident. It's like, okay, so when I was in middle school, maybe I have a little bit of resentment over how I was treated over my body, and now I've discovered a gym and I love working out, but I no longer have those motivators. Like, nobody's really laughing at me now. Like, now I'm stronger and bigger and more muscular and than most people, because most people really don't even regularly work out. So it's like you don't have that motivator of people laughing at you. What can motivate me now? Should I pivot? Should I just level off my training? Which is okay, because like, you might be destined to be like the best neurosurgeon in the world, which you can't do while also being Mr. Olympia, right? Or some other equivalent milestone. Maybe you can, but like, the idea is, where do you want to focus your energies? And I think being self-aware and having the humility to pivot. These are all things to where we can keep ourselves going long term. And dialing down last bit, just go a little bit more granular. Changing up your training is okay too, right? So there is this belief, well, like the muscle confusion theory, which I've brought up in several podcasts, of like the idea that we have to confuse the muscle in order to grow it. That largely is not believed anymore. There are some related concepts, of course, but changing up your training is not necessarily just muscle confusion theory, because if you want to be able to be better at good at other things other than just squat, deadlift, bench press, it's okay to every once in a while explore other things, right? Try the tibialis raises, try the external shoulder rotations, even if it's just to reject them, right? And having that, not being too frenetic in your training, which, once again, it's balance, because if you always try something new and you never stick to one thing, that's a good way to never make progress, because you keep bouncing from thing to thing and you never have time to really dial in. But occasionally incorporating some variety can be another key to long-term progress, motivation, and just happiness, I would say.
Well, it just also gives you new toys to play with. Sometimes I'll give clients just something new for their program, and as long as it's still achieving the basic objective that is in alignment with their goals, they're like, well, why are we doing this? Like, just, you feel better when you do it. It's kind of a break on your joints because it's a little bit easier, or it's just a new thing to play with. And it may not be doing that much different or much better physically, but if they feel and they look forward to it, it's like, oh, I like how that exercise felt or something. That's more than enough reason in my book to change things up a little bit, just to have something a little bit different and some variety for novelty's sake. And as long as you're getting the basic ideas covered, your basic movement patterns or training for the basic goals, you're still on track. But you don't have to worry about if it's something that's drastically different, because a lot of times it's just more of a nuance change, but it can feel different enough that it really brings some new life into a routine or approach that you're using.
Right. It's interesting because I wonder if there's some data that talks about this or relates to it. But when people are before they get the call to adventure, they usually want simplicity. So some people, they want something simple, they just want to get into it. All right. So, but after you get into it and you've been activated, so to speak, you've been radicalized into fitness and you really like it. There's different degrees of this. Then you usually want optimal. So it's interesting. Early on, you want simplicity, but later on, you want optimization, right? And I think that can be good, but it can also be a slight pitfall. Once again, you have to be aware of your goals. Like if your goal is to squat a tremendous amount of weight, then squats are always going to be a big part of your training. But if your goal is just to get more muscular, there might be other things you can explore. If your goal is to just feel better, there's other things you can explore. So I think in the pursuit of optimal, I would be careful not to be too dogmatic and to keep an open mind about the things that you can explore, because that definition really does change, and that's why there's different programs out there that claim to be the most I don't want to like straw man it and say like the most science-based, but like science-based and optimal and all these things. But you'll notice that these things are different from each other. They follow the same foundation, but so do a lot of workout programs. The reason that they differ is because optimal means a different thing to a aspiring Olympic athlete and optimal to a soccer mom of 3, right, in her 40s, right? Not to say one is necessarily better than the other, but like the soccer mom, for example, might have less time to train. So her optimal version of training might be to get, the 80-20 rules. Like I'm going to get 80%, maybe 90% of the benefit from like these 3 workouts that take 15 minutes, 3 times a week. And like they're intense workouts, but she gets the benefit she needs. And like she gets enough like walking and things throughout the day to where she really has a balanced routine, versus if you're training for like the javelin throw, your optimal training is going to be different. So for people who are wondering, that might be why there's not more of a consensus, right? Like why are we seeing something emerge in the same way that, let's say, smartphones beat out the BlackBerry phones with the keyboards and everything? Like usually there's like market trends towards like, because people will tell each other, it's like, oh, this thing works, and the best theoretically should bubble to the top and become obvious. Usually the actual best is a couple layers beneath that, is what I've noticed. Like the most popular thing usually isn't the best thing. It's what everyone thinks is the best. There's a couple layers underneath that after you get into it. But different things work for different people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in itself hasn't revealed itself in fitness because there is a discrepancy of what optimal actually means. And I think in the pursuit of that, people may sometimes lose sight of what their actual goal is, in my experience.
Absolutely. I think there's so much power with getting clarity on exactly what do you want, because some objectives even counteract each other. When I was in college, I was a bike racer, so I needed to be lean and light and fast. And then right after that is when I started to get into strength training, and I started to put on some muscle, particularly in the upper body. And people are like, that's not good. That's, your racing time is going to go down. I'm like, it'll be okay. It'll be, no, they were right. I got so much slower, particularly going uphill, putting on just 10 pounds of muscle on my upper body because every ounce counts. So I had to make that decision of like, well, do I want, quote, optimal for bike racing, or do I want optimal for putting on some muscle and filling out a little bit? And I had to kind of make that choice. Like, you can't have both. And the more clarity you get over what you really want, the more you can kind of direct that compass to go in that direction that you're saying. Because if, at first you're like, I don't know, I just want to get fit. Well, go in any direction, that's fine. But if you start noticing, this is more of what I want, I like X, I don't like Y, maybe a little of this, then you can really dial things in to go in the direction you want. And you're going to go so much faster and further with the same amount or even less work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, beyond the bike story, how do you think your training trajectory has changed? Over the decades?
Changed many different ways. Like a lot of, like you were saying earlier, where it's like, okay, I want to build some muscle. I want to try and get some attractiveness, to just feel better in my own skin. I always kind of was a meek little self-esteem issues kind of stuff growing up. And so a lot of it was just trying to build myself up internally inside. And so that intrinsic motivation was always there until it wasn't anymore. And then I felt like I had built myself up. I had some better self-esteem and self-worth. And then I started to evaluate and be like, okay, why am I doing this stuff? What is this still here for? And then it became much more about, well, it makes me really feel good. And that was a big change because I had been training before with the pursuit of, I want to look good and build my ego up. And I was not feeling good doing that. Like, I was always sick. I was always injured. My quality of life was suffering because of it. And then over time, it became more of, well, I just want to really feel good. I want to have good energy. I want to go out and hike with my friends and not feel like I'm dragging afterwards. I want to feel good about the foods I'm putting into my body and stuff. So that compass needle turned, and it was, I just want to feel good. I don't care if I have the best performance or the best physique in the world. If I don't feel good, well, then it doesn't help me very much. So things have always been evolving and changing with me. And I think part of that comes with age, but I think a big part of it also just comes from being more clear on what you're doing it for. Because I think we all get into fitness with, I don't know, I hesitate to call it like a superficial goal. Like, I want to look good naked, and I want to win this race, and I want to win the approval of the pretty girl or the cute guy or whatever. And then over time, you start realizing that stuff doesn't last very long, but you get more intrinsic about, why am I doing this for me, for my personal benefits? And that's when you get much, much deeper into that sort of thing. And that's where you get that, everlasting fire of the motivation for it. But it's going to evolve over time. And I think I don't know if you've run into this too much, Hampton, but do you run into folks who they kind of feel like, I want the one thing that's just going to set me up for life. Give me the program, give me the diet. I just want the one thing. I learn it once and then I'm good for the rest of my life, and I don't need to learn anything else. And it's like the happily ever after kind of mentality. Do you run into that very much at all?
I don't necessarily run into it phrased that way. In fact, it's more like people, because I try to encourage people to I give people a structure to their routine, and then I encourage them to add and change things after they're comfortable and they know what they're doing. So sometimes the issue is they want to change too much, right? So they kind of they get into it, they're like, oh, this is cool, and then they don't necessarily want to happily ever after with this one thing. They want a lot of variety, and that sometimes throws them off. But I will say this, there are some games and some goals that are everlasting, right? So like I heard this quote the other day: the goal of marriage isn't to get married, it's to stay married, right? The goal of fitness isn't just to get fit, you have to stay fit, right? So it's really important if you enjoy the process, as cliche as that sounds, right? So like you don't necessarily, if you only fall in love with winning the game and you don't fall in love with playing the game, then you might have a rough time in your life if you don't like it at all. So if you really hate going to the gym, but you like people looking at your muscles, those things are a little bit diametrically opposed, and you may have or they kind of work against each other. So you may have to reconcile that in some ways, and there's different ways to go about that. You have to ask yourself, why do you feel this way? Why do you dislike this? Why do you like this? And is there a way you can incorporate that into your life, is what I'm saying. So I would encourage people to find a process they like rather than just a goal. However, to add a little bit to what you were saying, I feel like the things we're talking about now, a lot of younger people, maybe even like my younger self, would kind of roll their eyes at, which is like, yeah, cool. I like, it's kind of just like, oh, you'll change and you'll understand when you get older. It's like, we've all heard that. So you've trained in, well, I would say probably a lot of people at this point. What is some advice you would give your younger self, if you could, knowing that they might roll their eyes at like, oh, eventually you're going to care about your joints and mobility and things. What is something that would appeal to them at this moment? Let's say this like stereotypical 17, 18-year-old, who has had a few years of success in the gym, put on like 20, 30 pounds of muscle, are looking good. And he's like, well, what can I add to my life based on this discussion? And you're like an extra few decades of experience.
I would probably tell my younger self that just as with like finances, it's just as important to live, quote, below your means, because I was always trying to squeeze every drop of effort that I could out of every day, like work as hard as I could, spend as much time as I could. I would go do a workout and it'd be earlier in the day, and then later on find, oh, now I've got a couple hours to kill. Oh, I should go work out again because, I've got the time. I might as well, kind of stuff. So I always felt like I was leaving a lot of progress on the table if I wasn't completely exhausting my resources, my energy and my time and things like that. And I wish more of that. I told myself, like, no, it's perfectly fine to leave some in the tank and to leave more on the table, because that's just going to help you recover more, stave off some of the injury. And yeah, maybe in the short term, you're not going to be going quite as far as quickly, but you're going to make a lot more long-term progress with that. And just the relief on mind, body, and lifestyle of feeling like I don't have to go all out all the time would have saved me so much effort and so much hassle and headaches when it came to fitness, because I always thought it was about just pushing yourself to your limit all the time and always go as hard as you possibly can. And now I do that very selectively at opportune moments where it's like, okay, now I've got a good amount of energy and now I've got a good amount of time. But most of the time, I'm just trying to put in a progressive amount of not effort, but making progress in my workouts, particularly with like technique and proficiency, doing things better, and not worrying about, am I doing it as hard as I possibly can? Because, man, I got a lot taxing myself these days. I've worked long hours. I've got a lot of commitments. It's like, man, if I'm really taxing the heck out of myself in my workouts, that's just going to be less I have for everything else. And I'm just going to run myself into the ground, which I did repeatedly when I was much younger. And again, I would have avoided so many hassles if I had just known that idea. But it can be a little scary, especially, when you're suffering burnout. You're getting exhausted. You're at the end of the rope. And backing off a little bit is the thing to do, but it can be scary to cut back a little bit and to give yourself a little bit more leeway, what would you tell someone who is feeling like, okay, I know I need to cut back a little or just take it a little easier, but I don't want to. I'm afraid of losing gains or whatever. What would you tell them in that scenario?
Well, it depends on the person. So some people are very research based, and some people are very intuitive based, right?
Mhm.
So like someone, who is like, "No, I just need to see the data that says like, I can go several weeks, without losing a significant amount of progress, and like even that progress I lose, I gain back relatively quickly." That one's pretty easy, But for some people, I would say when we're people who have trouble sitting still, I would advise them to focus their time on something else, right? So if you are feeling burnout, I usually don't have to convince them to to try something else because they already kind of want to. It's like the person who wants to quit their job. You don't have to convince them. That you just have to give them a way out to where they feel like they'll be okay. So what I would encourage people is I would say, like if we're talking a few weeks to a few months, even progress is built over years. And if you backslide in a matter of a few weeks, you haven't made that much progress. So I would say a few weeks won't make that much difference. And having that clarity of taking some time off can really help, right? Because I use this example. So if we're being chased by a bear, it's hard to think about your taxes, right? It's hard to think about, or even like what are you going to make for dinner tonight? It's hard to be creative, right? And there's this belief that some people have, which like many things, is like partially based in research. So I'm gonna not gonna state it exact, but like I have noticed there are 3 stages to where if I'm stressed, usually if you're burnt out, and you're hyper focused on one thing, and you're like, it's like I don't want to do this anymore. You're usually very stressed. It's hard to think about the long term. So like, let's say you're very, very much into, to use your example, into biking. You really want to get past, like really splitting hairs. You want to shave like that half minute off your race time. Shave that 10 seconds off your race time. And if you were able to take a step back and rest for a few days, your mind might be able to relax and think about a long-term goal, which is like, well, hang on a second. I actually have been dealing with some joint pain. Maybe it'd be good to spend a few months working on some mobility things, to help ease that before I'm pursuing that. So that's long term. And then after you rest a little bit more and you relax a little bit more, you might actually be able to be creative and say, so like I actually not only do I want to build a long-term foundation for my joints and my health, but I've become really passionate through learning about building that foundation that I want to teach it to other people, and now I want to give to other people. So like short-term, long-term, and then creativity, right? Which is why a lot of things come to us when we're just doing laundry, we're just driving. These aren't necessarily fallacies. These are often good ideas that we can utilize. So I think if you want to make progress in long-term at just about anything, it really helps to cycle through that. Pun only somewhat intended. To go through maybe a short-term thing where you're dialed in and you're working, because you have to do that and nothing else during the workouts, right? You got to do that, and then long-term, you're thinking like, where do I want to go in the next 2 or 3 months? What do I want to plan there, right? And then like you want to think overarching goals. It's like, what do I want to do with my life, right? It's like, do I want to spend a lot of time in the gym or do I want to do this? So like, I think it really helps to gain perspective sometimes and also spend some time in the dirt working. So you gotta cycle through that.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many valuable insights on that. I can tell there's going to be a lot of people after listening to this episode, they're going to be like really kind of letting it cook and marinate in their mind and think about these sorts of things, because it's so individual for each person too. The ways that we deal with burnout or the ways we keep making more forward progress and adjusting our training and stuff is going to be individualistic for everybody based on their circumstances and their age and their training goals and stuff. But I think there's a lot of value that just simply comes from being able to step back for a moment and meditate and think about some of these questions about what is important to you. Where are you going in the wrong direction? What are you doing right now that's probably not inconducive to your objectives? Or even what is your goal now? Is it different than when you started? Just thinking about these sorts of things. You don't even need to come up with an answer, dear listener. You can just simply think about this stuff and get your mind working on it in your subconscious background. And you'll be amazed at the perspectives and enlightenments that you have that's going to make a massive difference in your trajectory and your approach to life and health and fitness over the next 6 months. So don't just like sweep this stuff under the rug. Let it work in the back of your mind, because it's going to do some really amazing things to improve the quality of your fitness and your lifestyle moving forward here. So in closing here, Hampton, what are some of the things that we can do practically moving forward, just to, if we're still feeling like we're getting burnt out, or we're just getting a little bit like, oh, I'm getting bored of my workouts and stuff, what is something that we can do in the next 24 hours to really get the ball moving forward?
Depends on how long someone's been training. So if they've been training for like 2 weeks and they're feeling burnout, I would say just keep going. Right? Just try it for a month before you really try to pivot. But in the next 24 hours, man, that's an interesting frame of reference. Because it's 24 hours, I would say pick up a book or watch a video from someone that you respect that's been somewhere that you may want to go. Okay, and see what you can learn from that, because that's how we sometimes get those insights. Because yes, we don't want to be too frenetic with our training. We don't want to bounce back and forth and never make progress. But just about everyone pivots. Everyone who's become good at something has pivoted in some fashion in their life through their journey. Just about everyone, I would say. So let's say it's like a champion bodybuilder, right? You can read their memoirs. Be like, oh, interesting. So he actually ate more carbs than I realized, right? So that's like one small fairly small change. Like, okay, so maybe I'll try that. These, like, you don't have to pivot in the direction. You can still train, but if you're feeling that kind of burnout, I don't really get burnt out on things. I get stressed sometimes, right? It's like I've been stressed usually when I'm tired and like I'm trying to meet this goal, and I understand stress usually comes from me expecting something that isn't reasonable. Like, is it reasonable to expect me to finish this book in the next 24 hours? No, it's not. It's like, it's got 150 pages and I have to make it like really well researched. It's like, no, I just can't do it. Right. So but sometimes life puts those pressures on us. Like, I have to pay taxes. And it's like, I have $15,000 worth of taxes that I have to pay. And not actually, but it's like 20,000, 30,000, and I have to pay it. Otherwise I'm going to face a fine. When we start to face these things, sometimes they do seem unreasonable and we are stressed. But when we're able to get some clarity from that, we want to think about where we want to go, and we want to learn how to pivot and trying to get some idea of how we can optimize our system and letting ideas come to us. I don't really get burnt out because I think I have a constant flow of information. Or I'll put it this way, the things I do, I might get burnt out on, or things I do end up not pursuing long term, it would be things that I don't have a constant flow of information on. Like if I just do calisthenics, here's my system, I never improve it, I don't really get any kind of increasing joy because I'm not being progressive in that. I haven't learned new things. But when we talk about content creation, or even like audio, video, business, right, there's a constant flow of new information that I let myself try to be inspired on, right? And that isn't confusing to me. If it's confusing to you, I would try to reduce the amount and just focus on what you know and work on that. But I listen to things, I read things, and I think, that is something that makes sense. I'll try that. And you're like, oh, it turns out I thought it made sense, but it's actually terrible. But there are some things you're like, man, that was great. That makes a lot of sense to me. Because I think we are really built to work and thrive in a community, right? So like I am okay with, I do spend a lot of time by myself, right, working. But I also believe in the power of community, right? And I think we were made to grow and thrive and work in these kind of groups in some fashion. But because of modern life and modern conveniences, we aren't necessarily as connected now. And how we can get that connection if we are absent, if we are working all the time, is through things like podcasts, books, and videos, right? When we see, like, there might be like a business person that I admire or a fitness person that I admire, and I might never get to talk with them in the past. And I know we've complained a lot about the internet and smartphones and things, and there are downsides to that, 100%, right? There 100% are some downsides to these new innovations that we've put in life, not the least of which is our health. But there's also upsides to that. So we have done some trade-offs. So I think we can recognize that an upside is that we're now able to be exposed and learn from people that we otherwise would never have chances to ever learn from, right? And taking advantage of that is letting ourselves be inspired, consuming new information, exposing ourselves to new information to let ourselves be inspired. And then you'll find that if you do that, you have a constant flow of that and a constant practice of that, you'll naturally want to pivot slightly or majorly sometimes. Sometimes it's a huge thing, but you naturally want to pivot, and that can prevent you from getting burnt out. That's my process. I don't wait till I get burnt out and that change. I think I have these processes going, and that keeps me going long term. The times where that might go off track are times when I'm tired, times when I have to get a deadline, times when something new comes up, which it does, right? So those are times where I might get what I wouldn't call burnout, but I would have extra stress, extra pressure, extra maybe negative emotions going on. But just like letting myself run normally, I generally don't get burnt out because I try to have a flood of new information. And when I do start to get stagnant, then I recognize that, well, I probably should look up some other thing. And if you're not interested in anything in your field, then you may want to ask if you actually want to pursue granular knowledge in this field. Like we're like, I'm not really interested. Like I feel like I've learned everything I can about push-ups. Well, maybe your thing isn't push-ups. Maybe your thing actually is to get a little bit more muscular, right? And it's like, oh, interesting. So maybe your thing is actually to get stronger and like upwards pressing. You have to ask yourself, what do you actually want? And then you can let your interests kind of guide you. A lot of people aren't actually lazy. They're just headed in the wrong direction. A lot of people aren't actually unmotivated. They just haven't been exposed to that call to adventure that they actually want. They don't want to go to Mordor. They want to go to Hogwarts, or I'm trying to think of other things. They want to become a Jedi Knight, right? There's different calls to adventures for you to go on your own personal hero's journey, and there's different Yodas that you can learn from. Is what I would say.
Oh man, I love that. That's the lesson to take home all day long, folks. Not lazy, not unmotivated, just on the wrong path. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much that's hitting home for me right now. Hampton, everywhere people can find you, hybridcalisthenics.com. Your socials, your videos are amazing, dude. Your production quality and everything is wonderful. Your short form, long form videos, I'm always watching these things. Just search for your name, or is it best to go with Hybrid Calisthenics?
Hybrid Calisthenics is fine. If you look up Hampton Calisthenics, I probably will come up. For a period, and even now, I think I tried it the other day. If you look up long-haired Asian fitness calisthenics guy, I'll also come up, right? So like, I'm just saying there's different ways you can find me, right? So no, it's Hybrid Calisthenics across social media. You can look up Hybrid Fitness Routine. We have a free fitness routine if you want to look up that. If we have podcasts and different media to try to help people in the community. If you're interested at all. Thank you for the compliments on the production. We're always trying to level it up. That's something I've been trying to focus on for in this coming year.
Yeah, it's very impressive. So there's your homework, folks. Learning new information, getting part of a community. You can do it all through getting onto Hampton's YouTube videos, the podcasts and stuff. That is basically where we can keep moving forward. We support each other. We help each other grow, and it's not that hard to take action. The links are right down there in the description, so check his stuff out. Can't highly recommend it enough, and there's always great new things coming out, new perspectives on both life and fitness. Hampton, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really, really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Outstanding. So, yes, folks, check out this is the video on YouTube's. The audio is available on podcast directories if you want to just listen to this, take notes and so forth. I know I'm certainly going to be doing that myself. But if you have any further questions, you can reach out to Hampton through Hybrid Calisthenics or myself down through the links below. And I will talk to you folks in the next episode. Till then, be fit and live free.